Okay, so thank you for joining us this morning. This presentation is Tips for Accessibility in Post-Secondary Education. And presenting this morning is myself, Sherry Gagno, and Veronica Mojarodi. So as I said, I'm Sherry. I'm sitting in my home office with a screen behind me and blue walls and white doors behind me. I'm wearing a floral top, and my hair is pulled back in a ponytail, and I have a light complexion. I have been the accessibility manager here at the University of Windsor since February 2020. So as you would know, that means most of my time has been off campus, but it's been a pleasure to actually get on campus and get familiar with the buildings that I've only been looking at and floor plans, and being able to meet a few people in person. So I'm thrilled to have developed a partnership and a friendship with Veronica, who's on one of our accessibility committees, and I'm happy to co-present with her this morning. Veronica?
Great. Thanks very much, Sherry. Well, describing your physical appearance and setting sounds really easy until you actually have to try to do it. So it's important to highlight the details, but including what is key is actually quite difficult. So starting your gender identity is a good place to start. So in my case, I'm female. You may choose to reference your race or ethnicity. This can be done by your skin color. In my case, I have a pale complexion. Providing your age range may be useful in some instances. I'm a professor emerita. I'm associated with the School of Creative Arts. And being an emerita, that means I'm retired, and in my case, I'm in my 60s. You may want to identify physical features related to your appearance. Because I'm seated, and this is online, the descriptors I use will primarily be related to my head. So a good place to start is my hair color is white, the length of my hair is short, my hairstyle is straight, and my appearance at the moment, I've actually combed my hair, so it looks okay. I could describe my clothing or fashion style, but I don't really think I have any kind of a style. So I'll simply mention that I'm sitting here in a black and white shirt with a black vest. And finally, locating yourself in the physical space is actually an important thing to do. And so you might want to include some descriptive details. In my case, I'm sitting in my living room by a desk, which is located behind a couch. Okay. Okay, Kara.
All right. So our agenda for today, we're going to, we've done our introductions. We're going to contextualize the student experience. We're going to talk a little bit on some of the principles of universal design for learning. And then there's been some interest in screen readers and how do they work and how does that relate to accessible documents. And then we're going to be touching on something that we both learned on at one of our presentations or workshops that we went to earlier this year, is providing description for people with visual impairments.
Okay, as Sherry mentioned, we're both part of a committee which is called the University Accessibility Built Environment Committee, and we both had the pleasure of going to the online conference this year, which is the Rick Hansen Foundation. Now, some of you people might be aware that Rick Hansen was a track and field athlete, still is. At the age of 15, he had a spinal cord injury, and he became a paraplegic. So the past many years, he's a very vocal activist and a philanthropist with people with disabilities. And he's quite famous for his Man in Motion tour. What I was particularly interested in when I went to this conference is that he's now developed something called the Rick Hansen Foundation Accessibility Certification. And this is a national rating system that measure and certifies the accessibility of buildings. So much like you have in green building accessibility LEED certification, now you can have people from the foundation to come to your facility and actually rate it in terms of accessibility. So Sherry and I were completely blown away by this. Okay, Sherry. The other conference, which is interesting, is the Accessibility Conference, which is held every year at the University of Guelph. This year, And we took there were a lot of sessions, many of them we're going to talk about this afternoon that we went to. And when we came back, Sherry and I were just buzzing for days after this session. And we said to Erica, you know what, we need to talk to CTL and we need to talk to all the people that are interested in accessibility in terms of their teaching. And so thus, this particular conference led to this workshop, and we highly advise you to attend it in May. It's really quite good. Okay, Sherry.
Okay, so I forgot to mention at the beginning, if you have questions, just put it in the chat or turn on your mic or put up your hand, and we'll stop. You know, it's informal that you can. It's not a huge group, so we're able to just address any questions that come up as we go along. So we wanted to contextualize the student experience, and we think this is very important to talk about because students come to us in the university setting, and we often think of them in the context of how we're seeing them today. You know, what are the concerns right now? And sometimes understanding where the student has been for the past, K to 12 years helps us kind of appreciate the effort that students are putting into the class, why they may be asking for assistance, and how we might approach accommodations or working in principles of universal design in your course structure. So thinking about the K-12 experience, some students may have had a very good experience. They've learned to advocate for themselves. They had supportive caregivers or parents or other people in their lives. Great relationships with the principal, vice principal, learning support teacher if they needed that kind of support. And so they come in with some expectations that they might be able to have a very good experience, or they're hopeful for a good experience in post-secondary. Some other students have had a very less positive experience from K to 12. They may have already had a lot of frustrations. They may have had to advocate and it didn't go well. And so they might be coming into the university experience hesitant that it didn't go so well in K to 12. Now they're in post-secondary. They may not want to disclose their diagnosis. They may not want to let people know that they need help. They may want to try to do it on their own. And so when they get to a point halfway through the semester or they're going into their final, then they might disclose that they've actually contacted student accessibility services, and now they may be asking for their accommodations because they see that they're at a point where maybe they should have been using the supports that they're entitled to all the way through. So sometimes we do hear, why am I finding out this now? The final exam is in a week. Why do I need to accommodate now? Why did they get through all the semester without it? And is this really necessary? Well, there's been, maybe because of their experience from K to 12 that they were, or they've been told in the high school that when you get to university, nobody's going to help you. You're on your own. You've got to be prepared to do it on your own. And they really felt that that was important for them to try to get through the semester without their accommodations. And that's why sometimes you hear a little late in the semester that they do need accommodations. Some students, especially particularly around mental health, may have just received a new diagnosis and they don't know that they can ask for supports. They don't know about accommodations. They're afraid of the stigma, and it's all very new to them. So they may have, an adjustment time or adjustment period. The other thing is thinking about how much effort students with disabilities may be putting into their education. So for some students, they may record the lecture and then go back and they transcribe, or they might record it on a Teams meeting, but then they have 40 pages of transcription to sort through to find the important information. Or if they're applying for accommodations, we'll talk about that in a minute, how much effort that takes to get the accommodations in place for the student. Thinking about their in-class experience. So what might that be like? So think about a student who may have a hearing impairment, and it's very common to throw up a video in the class, and if there's no captions on that video, that student is not able to engage or understand or participate in that information that's coming to them through the video. And then if there's 45 minutes to an hour discussion after that, they're not gleaning a lot. They're not able to participate as much if they weren't able to understand the video. And you can think about it for students who may prefer the text. Like my son is autistic, and he always puts subtitles on all the videos that he watches. And I said to him, why do you keep putting that on? And he goes, well, I don't really know what they're saying unless I can read it. And and he doesn't have any hearing impairment. It just helps him process information. Or students where they're learning English, having those words will help them with new concepts, and be able to have both the audio and the text to help them understand the information. So we're thinking about what are the experiences in the classroom. And this is why we're going to be talking a little bit about universal design, so that we can embed some of these elements of accessibility right into the design of the class, so that not every time a student needs some kind of support that they always have to fall back on accommodation. So this slide here, I was able to take from another presentation that I think is fairly effective. And it talks about the accommodation model and how that's reactive instead of proactive. And what this image is really showing you, so on the screen, there's an image of a student showing 5 red lines to 5 individuals. And what this represents is the student, first of all, goes to Student Accessibility Services, discloses disability, provide all the medical documentations, maybe their previous IEP from their high school, and then they work out their accommodation letter, and then they go and have 5 individual conversations for every semester for every year that they're in school. So by the time they finish a 4-year degree, and this image is repeated a few times to illustrate that that student is now having 40 conversations by the time that their degree program is over. And this isn't including that maybe there might be TAs or that they may GAs that they may have to have this conversation with, or if they're trying to access kind of services, supports, or participate in other things around university, they're, this constant explaining, this constant asking. So this is why universal design becomes so important.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about universal design from multiple points of view. So universal design has its roots in architecture. And then as an architect, that's where I first heard this concept of universal design. As many of you have witnessed, schools and public buildings are often retrofitted with ramps or other architectural buildings after the building is built. In other words, we have architects that come back and fix the building after it's been constructed. Now, that's a little odd, don't you think? Coming back after the fact to fix something. So these coming back is extremely expensive. It's very time consuming. And it creates an environment that is rather awkward because you're trying to fit things in and it never was part of the original process. So many architects rallied in the 80s about trying to think about how to be proactive in the design process. In other words, thinking about physical barriers and all the physical barriers that might occur and affect everyone, not just one small group of people, but the entire population. So they came up with the idea of universal design. And so my familiarity with universal design is through architecture. Over time, we have universal design and learning, referred to as UDL. And it has developed around the same idea that the universal design and learning is proactive and that it values inclusivity and diversity through good curriculum design. Now, the definition of UDL is it guides educational practice and curriculum development with the goal of giving all students an equal opportunity to learn. And it focuses on creating a flexible instruction that can be customized for all students, okay? So that's the other thing, is to think about the inclusivity. There's a myth that we have about an average or a typical learner in our classrooms. But in reality, we all know we have diverse students who come to the university. All learners have strengths, weaknesses, and needs, as well as different and preferred areas of interest. So variability is the rule and not the exception. Students have demands that are associated with sensory and physical abilities, which Sherry referred to, emotional and behavioral challenges. There's learning difficulties, and we have English language barriers as well, and the list could be incredibly long, okay? So we need, when we demystify who our students are, and it's really important that we actually take some time to do this, how do they best learn, okay? What is their cultural background, their learning styles, their interests that they bring to their learning situation? What are their talents and strengths and needs? And what form of communication do they use and do they need? And Sherry and I are going to spend a bit of time on this in a bit. So why should we use UDL? Well, it enhances everyone's learning, but what's really important is that it allows a multiple means of comprehension and expression, expressing their learning. As we mentioned, accessibility should be part of the design process and not an afterthought, not like those buildings. I hate this when I see they have to spend millions of dollars of putting a ramp in. I'm ranting here, Sherry, but Sherry has heard me rant about this many times, okay? So the thing is to build things, practical universal design in your learning as you do your courses. Okay, this will give your students make it easy and confident to navigate through your courses. And it also gives them a positive learning experience, which is really motivating. And it also contributes to higher completion rate of courses and for, again, their programs. So this is an important component. Okay, Sherry. Next one. Okay, I'll make this short because there's lots of content here. But the important thing here is providing multiple and varied and flexible options into your curriculum. We need to adapt our instruction so that students' needs are met. So the first thing is to think about your presentation. We need to make the tools that we are using work for everything. Sherry's going to spend a great deal of time on that. We're used to using text. Certainly we have used textbook, but there are other things to use like audio and video and photographs and images and all sorts of technology. So the presentation is not one specific thing. We need to think of variety. The second thing is that we need to think about expression by the students and assessment of the students. We need to consider offering flexible ways that the students can design what they're best in. We'll go over this a little bit later, but we give them opportunities. Now, there's an image you see on the right-hand side of this slide, which is the front of a cover of a book. And I'll give you a little bit of a story here. I taught a class on women power in the environment. And one of the things for the final assignment, I said, we can do this in whatever way fits your mode of learning. Lots of students did not want to write an essay. This is not something they felt comfortable with. I had one student come in and decide to cook a meal for everyone. And in talking about the environment, by cooking that meal, they demonstrated food miles, and they commented on the literature about food miles and sustainability, but it was an act of performance, an act of doing. Very different than writing an essay or doing an exam. And the student on the right, she did not want to write, and she said, I write poetry. This is what I do. My love is poetry. Could I write a poem for this class? I said, sure, write a poem. She wrote a poem about NIMBYism, not in my backyard, and she published all of the poems, and that wonderful poem appeared in this book. Near and dear to my heart in that instance, okay? So it doesn't have to be conventional method. And the last one is engagement of students. We can give them individual activities, group activities, but that has to be inclusive, and we have to think about what motivates and supports their learning. Okay, Sherry.
All right. We'll keep going here. So we're going to get into some practical applications at this part of the presentation. So I wanted to talk a little bit about screen readers because we're hearing more and more about students using them. Faculty and staff, we've been able to support in the acquisition of some software and training around this, and we've been doing some training around screen readers for students as well. So there's a lot of products that are available now. There's some free products available online, and then there's some specialty products that are geared towards the user's specific needs. In Microsoft, there's a lot of built-in features for accessibility. I don't know if you've ever tried that, but there is the dictate function in Outlook and the dictate function in Microsoft Word. So you can, if your wrists are sore, neck are sore, you're having difficulty typing, you can use that. But there's also the read aloud function that allows the reader to hear the content, and you can adjust the speaker and the speed. And then a lot of devices now have built-in features. So the Apple products, the Android products are now having built-in features that allow users to hear the text that is on the screen. So who uses screen readers? People with visual impairments, also students who, or people, I guess, with cognitive or learning disabilities who prefer audio content or prefer to have that audio support while reading. So it's read to them while they're also reading the text. And then English language learners. So for example, the University of Windsor has a free software available to anyone on campus called Read and Write. And you can stop it, the program, as it's reading the information and click on dictionary, so you can find out what that word means. And there's a visual along with a text description for words so that people can understand the word. And so it's a very helpful tool for many people, and we're finding a lot of people are enjoying the Read and Write software that we have available. And then there's Equatio as well, which is more for digitization of scientific and mathematical formulas. And there's more information if you want to reach out later, I can provide that. So what we're going to do is we did have, oh, there we go. Thank you, Erica. We did have these videos embedded, but when we were practicing, there was a lot of echo. So during this presentation, I'm going to stop and restart the PowerPoint presentation. So we're going to have some discussion time. I'm going to show two videos. They're very short. The first one shows you how a screen reader works, and we'll have a little discussion after that. And then we're going to show what a screen reader reading a well-formatted document and a poorly formatted document.
We'll start at the top with this graphic/figure and read linearly down through the PDF.
Graphic UC Women's Initiative for Professional Development logo. Heading Level 1 2020 UC Women's Initiative for Professional Development, UCWI, Program Information and Nomination Process. UCWI is a unique, experiential professional development program offered to mid-career women, faculty, academic personnel, and staff who demonstrate the potential to advance their careers at UC. Heading Level 2 Purpose. To help women advance in their UC careers and retain women who have demonstrated potential for advancement. Heading Level 2 Sponsors and Management. List with 2 items. Bullet UCWI is sponsored by the President's Office and the Link System-Wide Advisory Committee on the Status of Women, SACS. Bullet System-Wide Talent Management administers the program and coordinates nominations with locations.
Now I'll tell the screen reader to jump to the next heading.
Target Audience Heading Level 2. Participant Outcomes Heading Level 2. Participant Criteria Heading Level 2.
Now I'll tell the screen reader to jump to the next list.
List with 7 items. Bullet Women in mid-career who demonstrate the potential to advance in their careers at UC. List with 4 items. Page 2. Bullet Participate fully.
Now I'll tell the screen reader to jump to the next table.
Table with 14 rows and 3 columns. Row 1, Column 1, Page 3, Start Date. Column 2, End Date. Column 3, Activity.
Now I'll direct the screen reader to read these table data cells. Note how it includes references to the associated header cells.
Row 2, Start Date, Column 1. End Date, Column 2, 8/20/19. Activity, Column 3, STM sends heads-up information for locations to prepare for nomination process.
Now I'll tell the screen reader to jump to the next link.
Page 4, see last 2 pages for full schedule link. Table with 16 rows and 3 columns. Row 2, SACS Contact, S. Column 2, jalazali@ucanra.edu link.
All right, any observations from watching how a screen reader works? I see, Erica, constant change. Yep, lots of change. John?
If you don't have the heading set up properly, then it won't be accessible.
Yes, that's very important. Any other observations? Erica?
I was surprised how much of a learning curve there is to listen to the voice and the cues it gives. I had trouble separating the information, like the heading information, from the content. And the pausing was so quick that actually I was hearing the heading as the content. So like heading level 2 was to me the content that it was reading out loud. So I was having trouble making sense of what it was saying. And I have no idea how I'd understand the table when they read it out.
Yeah. Yeah, it would take, yeah, it reads very fast. Now, you can usually, most programs allow you to adjust the speed of the reading, so you can speed it up, slow it down. So I would imagine once you became more skilled with it, you could speed it up so you could read things a lot quicker. Okay, so that was an example of a well-formatted document, and some of the things that you noted there, John, like if things are set up properly, it allows the user to navigate the document a lot better, and also it allows the program to identify the information. So you would have heard 4 bullet points, and then okay, so then the listener knows that there's 4 points coming up, or heading level 2, so you know that it's under the subhead, and it's able to identify those things. If you're not setting it up properly, then the software can't identify those things. So even being able to identify a link, and then how it read the link. So those are some things to note. Okay, I'm going to go to the next video. And this is going to show some examples of a document that's set up properly and versus one that's not. So this is also just a short video.
Hey everybody. As you may have seen from the title page, the topic for this video is accessibility. Accessibility deals with how a computer reads data from your documents. I figured many of you have probably never used a screen reader before, so I recorded some examples of accessible and inaccessible content. After you hear a couple of these examples, I think you'll see how big of an impact you have by the way you enter your data. First, I'll have you listen to an example of inaccessible content, and then you'll hear an example of accessible content. After you hear both examples, you'll be prompted with a question. Answer the question, and continue on watching the video.
Top 5. Franz Arkenton. Heading Level 1 Top 5. Heading Level 2 Franz Arkenton. Dash picture 1 2.59 inches wide by 0.82 inches high dash 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 underline 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 dash dash dash. Description: image of Franz Arkenton 2.59 inches wide by 0.82 inches high heading level 2. Blank. 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 Page 3. Page 3. Less link http://bleachereport.com/articles/330,695 the top 10 Minnesota Vikings quarterbacks of all time /page/11. Less link source of Franz Arkenton article greater.
Well, by now I think you've heard enough to understand how important it is to enter your data to be accessible. But before you move on and close this video, I just want to reinforce the fact that creating accessible documents benefits everybody.
Okay, so I'm just going to talk about a few general tips about accessible content, and those will apply for many people, and then we'll go into the specifics on setting up your Word document so that it's accessible for screen readers. So some general tips. So minimum is 12-point font. And so sometimes, you know, when we create documents that are digital, sometimes we think it doesn't really matter what size of the font that we use, because we assume that people can just blow it up on their own screen and it will be fine. But there are some times that people will want to print off your documents. So for example, if you're giving students directions on research, they might want to have that direction printed out and have that next to their computer, so they're not going back and forth between screens, or that they can take that information that's printed and go to the library, and they have that easily accessible. So if you're using really small font and they print it out, it's very difficult for people to adjust. So 12 to 18-point font is very helpful. Using high contrast color options is also very helpful for those who, particularly with low vision or people who might have color blindness. So one way to know if your document has good color contrast is to go print to the print function, print in grayscale, and then you'll see a preview of what your document looks in grayscale. So sometimes people think they have a really good color contrast, so they might use like red and green next to each other. And when you look at that in black and white or in grayscale, they actually look like the same color. So doing that test before you finalize a document will help you show what would that look like for somebody who may be colorblind. The font choice, sans serif fonts are preferred. So Verdana, Arial, Calibri are the best font to use. A lot of fonts with serifs, or the little feet on them, like Times New Roman, can be difficult for people to distinguish the characters. They can blend together. They're too ornamental. It does make it very difficult for people to read. So a sans serif is actually preferred. And the APA style guide has actually adjusted to account for using sans serif fonts. When you're trying to emphasize things, bold is preferred. Italics, again, looks ornamental. It might be hard for people with learning disabilities or dyslexia to distinguish the words. Underlining also can make the words difficult to distinguish unless it's hypertext link. That's kind of understood. When you see something underlined, that's actually a good visual cue that we're looking at a hypertext link. And then there's some debate still on uppercase. So when I look at the research, sometimes it's discouraged to use uppercase. So what I would say is using it in a limited capacity in your documents is preferred. If you feel that you need to use uppercase as part of the design. I've talked to people who are part of People's First, which is a group for people who have been labeled disabled or labeled with an intellectual disability. Some of them have said that they have very difficult time reading full uppercase. So that's something that you might want to use in limited situations. And also using effective use of white space. So if it's very cluttered, some people have a hard time knowing how to follow the information. How does the information flow? Students that I've talked to with ADHD, for example, also find it very distracting if there's a lot of information crammed in. So the effective use of white space helps people to organize the information that's presented to them. Okay, and some other general tips: meaningful labels, titles, and headings. So if you're using charts, tables, graphs, make sure that they're labeled with meaningful headings, not table 1, table 2. It's very difficult for people to understand what that means, or if they're using some software to navigate through the documents, having meaningful labels, titles, and headings will help. And then if you're printing documents, use matte finishes when you can to reduce the glare. So some folks with visual impairments or light sensitivity can find it very difficult to read shiny or glossy information on shiny or glossy paper. And then use plain, clear language. Okay, I'm going to stop my presentation again, and we're going to just, based on that information, okay, so Michael says grayscale test works really well. Thank you. So I'm going to show 2 documents, and just based on the information I've given you there, we'll critique it together, and we'll just take a few minutes with that. So I'm going to first show an example of a poor design. So just shout it out, use your microphone, or put it in the chat. Yeah, I can't see the chat, so Veronica, I'll need you to read if there's anything put in the chat. Otherwise, just turn on your microphone. So this is an example of poor print design. I mean, it's exaggerated as a poor print design, but what are some of the things that you notice right away? So in this document, I have an image in the background with light purple boxes, text boxes, and description in white font. So what do you notice?
To me, it's just a beige square. That's all I see.
Yeah, poor color contrast, so it looks like a beige square. Anything else? Or what you would recommend to remediate this poor document?
So there's been some comment about color contrast being difficult, being very light and blurry. The font is ugly, hard to separate the text from the background. The font is too small and too much text. It's left justified. And then I think Michael had given a comment about the problem of having black text on a white background.
Yeah, those are great things. I mean, this was meant to be obviously bad, but yeah, so you want better color contrast. That font that's used up at the top where it says Campus Concert, it's not easily legible. So you definitely want, if you are using a background, it's not overly busy, but you definitely need to make the font bigger, bolder, have a better color contrast. So you might want to darken it up a little bit in the background and brighten up the font. The other thing is that there's a hypertext link at the bottom. That's not underlined, or there's no color change for that, so it would be hard to know that that's a hypertext link. Okay, so that's great. I'm going to pop up another.
A good rule of thumb. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Michael. Yeah.
I was just going to say a good rule of thumb, when you're creating a document like that to share, that would hopefully prevent you from ending up with that document is, to ask yourself, what am I trying to communicate and what is actually being communicated? You know what I mean? What am I trying to communicate and how much of this is necessary to communicate what I'm trying to communicate?
Okay, and here's another, this is a good print design example, so you can just talk about what worked out, or if you see something that's actually not good, you can let me know. But so we have an image of a person standing with a pail and leaves, and it's Yard Angels is the title. And there's information down the right-hand side of the page and some text on the left hand. So what would you say is working well for this document?
It's orderly, and the I believe it's red. I'm mostly colorblind, but the choice of the red text on the white isn't actually a huge problem here because the type of red that's chosen is darker.
Okay, thank you.
We have some comments that it's easy to tell where to start reading, and it has great contrast.
Yeah. Yeah, so those are some of the things. The image is large, it's well orientated to the text, it's easy to read font, good color contrast, so we have bold white on a dark brown and bold white on red. So it's just neat, easy to read, and the font size, which you can't really tell, is a 12-point font and larger. Okay, so those are just some high-level things. And I'll go back to our PowerPoint. Oh, yes. So here there is a link. We have a bunch of resources at the end of this document that has a link to ARIA's accessible content cards. So there's some quick tips on making all your documents. So we have Word, Excel, social media, PowerPoint, and Adobe. So you can take a look at those. It's not a how-to document, but it has a lot of reminders on what to put in your documents to make sure that they're accessible. Okay, accessible formatting for screen readers. So as we discussed when we looked at the simulation, the proper formatting assists with navigation. It makes it a lot easier to use. The information is conveyed effectively. And so we're going to look at how to create a good Word document because they make better PDFs. And also keep in mind that some folks prefer Word documents are a lot more accessible, even though you may have an accessible PDF. So making both of them available will be helpful. I know some people don't like sharing Word documents because they can be adjusted, but it may be a preferred format that will enhance accessibility. So when we're looking at formatting Word documents for screen readers, there's a couple things that we need to do. So learning how to do headings properly, using effective alt text, having meaningful links, using the automatic formatting features that Word has. So using formatting for lists and columns, using other built-in features so you're not using space or tab, because in screen readers, and that's what the second video would have shown, is that somebody was using the space button or space bar, sorry, to move things over. So what you would hear is space, 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 and then the word, or tab, 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 tab. So we need to make sure that we're using the built-in features for formatting. I'll show you how to use the accessibility checker in the documents. And then just as a tip is to save the document as a PDF. And sometimes people print to PDF. And the reason why that save to PDF is better is that when you print to PDF, a lot of these accessible features and formatting is gone. So even though the screen reader will still be able to read the text, it won't be able to scan the headings or scan for lists or scan for hypertext links. So a lot of that specialty formatting will be gone. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing again and go to a document. So we're going to go through each of these things and I'll show you how to do that. Was I sharing my PDF? Did you see that? Okay. Stop presenting. Okay, so I have an article here that I borrowed from the Daily News, but the Daily News had done it accessibly, so it's just I borrowed this for content. So first of all, in terms of doing a heading, so you highlight the area that you want as a heading. So most of us would do bold and center right away. And what we actually want to do is use the headings that you see up here. And so we would select heading 1. Now, you may not like how that is headed, and you see you'll get an arrow here. You may not like the formatting of this, so all you have to do is right-click and select Modify. And in here is where you make the modifications to the heading so you can set it up any way you want. So for the rest of your document, every time you choose heading 1, it will format to how you've chosen here. So I'm going to choose bold. I want it centered. I'm going to move it up to 18-point font. I don't particularly like Calibri Light, so I'm going to change it to just regular Calibri. And you can then you click OK. So anytime that I want to format to heading 1, now it takes a second to set up, but then every time throughout your document, you can just click on heading 1 and it will be formatted like this every single time. So I've got subheadings down here and I am going to list them as heading 2. So again, I click up here. I modify if I'd like to. I don't like Calibri Light. I find it hard to read. I'd like it to be bold. And there we go. We have heading level 2. So when somebody's using a screen reader, they'll know that this is level 1 and this is level 2. Now with screen readers, most of them can read up to 6, can identify up to 6 heading levels. So you don't want to do more. Even if your program can do more levels, just stick with 6. So there we go. So we've done our headings, and then we need to use effective text, alt text. So when you can click on your picture and right click, and then you can edit alt text. So we want to make sure that we're not putting too much information, but we're putting in relevant information. So what are we trying to communicate here? So this is about this article is about the Accessibility Awareness Days event, and we have an image here. Does somebody want to give a shot of what they would put in this image?
We have 3 people discussing using sign language.
Okay, yeah, you could put 3 students talking using sign language. Okay, that would be enough. The fact that they're wearing, two are wearing orange shirts, somebody wearing a white shirt, or that this fella has a beard, that's irrelevant. But what we're trying to communicate is that there's 3 students talking using sign language. So that's great. What you don't need to say is image of or picture of, you just describe it. And then the screen reader will identify that is an image and then read the alt text. Now I can't pull down here, but because in my corner I have a little screen, but there's also an option to select decorative. So if you had a wingding or like a divider or something, mark it as decorative so that the screen reader knows that there's no important information to share about that image.
Sherry, we have someone saying that a good rule of thumb is not too long or descriptive.
Yes. Yeah, excellent. Okay, lists and columns, meaningful links. So down here, find more information including registration on Accessibility Awareness Days, click here. So sometimes we do that, and what we would do is highlight click here, and we'd right tab, add in our link, and I'm just going to do uwindsor.ca/area. Okay, so the problem is that when you have a lot of hypertext links and the screen reader is going through the document and you ask it to find all the hypertext links, what you end up hearing is click here, click here, click here, click here. So that doesn't give the user any real information on where they're going to go if they click here. So we don't want click here in our documents. So for more information, including a session registration, click on the Accessibility Awareness Days website. So that is where you would put your link, and that's good descriptive information. And so when it's finding all those links, it will know where to go. Okay, lists and columns to format. So if you sometimes people want to do lists by tabbing and pressing enter, and then you get tab, enter, and you get a lot of information that's not that helpful. So make sure that you're using the lists and columns, which I think many people are familiar with, but don't do those shortcuts where you're doing tabs and enters and trying to format manually that way. Make sure that you're selecting as many of the built-in features as possible. Again, with bullets and lists, if it's something that is in a specific order, like step 1 you do this, step 2 you do this, step 3, use numerical bullets. So you'd want to select this. But if it's just bullets of information that's not in the sequential order, then go ahead and just use your regular bullets. The other thing too, when you want to indent, so I'm indent the first paragraph. Again, in the paragraph, we have automatic formatting here, that you have the first line and you click OK. So then the user isn't hearing tab. The first in the series is March 2nd. Tab presenting our Gigi and Veronica. So you don't hear tab. So try to use the automatic formatting features as much as possible. Okay, accessibility checker, if you want to know how you've done, it's not the most comprehensive tool, but it is helpful. You can go to review and click on accessibility checker, and of course there's no accessibility issues found here, but you really do need to know these principles because the accessibility checker doesn't pick up on everything. So make sure that you run that before you finish, and if you need to save it as a PDF, file, save a copy, and then PDF here. Right now, there's more options that you can select on, and right now, the versions that we have through the university have a lot of the automatic things that you would normally need to click under more options already selected. So I think you're pretty set if you follow those basic rules.
And Sherry, we have some comments.
Okay.
One person, Erica said, I didn't know you could mark images as decorative. Peter says, I'm constantly changing text that I'm given from click here to something more accessible. Michael says it's a good idea as well as to change the default color used for hyperlinks. The typical blue is difficult to read against a white screen, and if you're using dark mode, white on black, or color inversion, hyperlinks become invisible.
Okay. Yeah, so I mean, oh, the other thing you know, I forgot to check the font size. I can't remember what I had on that document. But then again, you know, you want to check the font size, making sure that's at least 12-point font, and you're on your way. So on the bottom of the slide that I had those tips, there's a link to a WebAIM article. And that will give you the step-by-step on the things that I just showed you. Is there any questions about formatting for screen readers or any other additional comments that people might have, or if they know something useful that I didn't mention?
One thing, I don't know if maybe this is the wrong time for it, maybe it isn't, but it seems related to what you've been saying, is what options do we have at the university for making our websites and things that we're posting on, you know, official university sites like the CTL site more accessible, given that sometimes the template is actually engineered to be inaccessible, from what I can tell.
Okay, Michael, that's actually very timely. And we have been working with IT, and there is somebody who is now started in that department who's more savvy around those accessibility, Brad Bazaar actually. And so they're re-looking at the template that we have. Everything's been moved over to the next Drupal platform, which makes things more accessible. And we are looking at getting some software that's going to automatically scan the website and point out when things aren't accessible. And so we are working on improving that, and having that enterprise software is going to help. And I'm hoping that we're also going to be able to get into training again for those who manage departmental websites.
Oh, those all sound like great steps. Thanks.
Okay, you're welcome. We're going to be moving into the next part about visual descriptions, but while we're still talking about Word documents and accessible documents, does anybody else have any questions? Right now, I've been working at having a how-to document, so you know where to click, where to find the information, and how to do this. So one student started it this summer. I've got another one looking to finish, and we'll be sharing those as soon as they're ready. And so that will be for Excel, Word, and PowerPoint. Okay, we will move on.
Okay, thanks, Sherry. So when Sherry and I attended the annual accessibility conference at the University of Guelph, we had the pleasure of attending a session which was by Joel Snyder. And Joel's a rather interesting character because he's a pioneer in audio description. He's trained, actually, you'll love this, Michael, he's trained in the theater, but he also has a very strong English background. So he became very interested in audio description. He's helped facilitated in many theaters in New York City description. He's worked for television, and he's also done films as well. He's written some books. The one they're showing up on the screen on auto description is a very, very good one to take a look at. And he's been involved with a lot of national enabling organizations, and he's very outspoken about that. Now, most of us are not going to be involved with audio describing films. That's not something, maybe some of us, Peter or Michael, you would be, but the majority of us, what we do is we use images and charts, and we primarily use PowerPoints. So what I'm going to focus on in the next little bit is just the kinds of things that we need to think about when we do PowerPoint slides and what kinds of things to consider. Okay, Sherry. Okay, so it's important to consider what to describe. You had mentioned this a bit, Michael. You need to take a close look at your images and then ask yourself some of the following questions. And we've got the questions here. What does the image convey? What is most essential? What is happening? And who are in the images? And I'm going to go through each of these relative to the image that we have on the right-hand side. So let's do the first question. What does the image convey? This is not a single image. Many of us do this quite often where we do a PowerPoint and we put multiple images in the document. There are 6 images here and a question in the middle. Do all the images convey the same thing? That's something to basically ask. Do all these people have accessibilities? So the problem is when you have multiple images is how you're going to connect them. And that's sometimes more difficult than we can imagine. The second question is, what is most essential? So when you look at these, is there a relationship between these images? How are you going to create that kind of relationship? Are they all people's needs requiring accommodation of some sort? So you're going to have to make the links between what the relationship is because the students can't see that. What is happening is the other question. When you look at this, there are 4 images that relate to mobility. There's a person that's situated at the foot of the stairs using a crutch. There's another person walking on the street walk and the sidewalk using a cane for the blind. We have multiple families. We can't quite see if they're women or men, but we might assume they're parents walking on a bridge with strollers. And then there's a woman sitting at a wheelchair, okay? But that means we have to describe those. That's a lot to describe. There are 2 images that are specific to individuals who are blind or low vision. One is a person sitting reading a Braille document, and the other person is walking with a cane for the blind. And then there's 1 image of a group of young people with a variety of accessibility needs. What are we supposed to assume? That there's some camaraderie or connection between them. So the last question is, who is or in the images? Well, in our example, there's a diverse group of people. So it's very difficult when you're showing a slide that has multiple images. So you have to be very, very careful about how you describe what is essential. And the other thing is when you're trying to describe all of this, and Peter said this in the sidebar in the chat, putting so much information in can be distracting, it gets irritating after a while, and it can be really, really time consuming. So the first rule of description is describe what you see, but if what you see is too busy, then figure out what you eliminate, okay? Okay, so Sherry, you want to go to the next one? Okay, so providing a description of an image is a thoughtful and time-consuming process. Please listen, thoughtful and time-consuming. This is not done quickly. So here's some things that how to describe. The first one is be descriptive. Use words that are clear and have vivid meaning. Now we'll use this slide on the right as an example. This is a long, straight stairway. I do not have to say anything about this, okay? This is just one particular thing, we're describing it. You want to be objective. You want to stick to the facts. Avoid being analytical and interpreting and giving emotional response. I could say, using this example, the woman is struggling going up the stairs. That's interpretation. I don't know that, okay? That doesn't, I am interpreting that. Or I could say that the woman is totally exhausted. Again, that's an interpret. Unless you know for sure something, you are speculating. So do not include it. Now, you can comment on the fact that this woman has a shift in her body to carry her child on the left-hand side in her carriage. You can say that, but anything else would be inappropriate, okay? The other one is logical. Use a sequence or a structure. Now, lots of us have a tendency in our society to go from left to right. We might use clockwise to counterclockwise, but be prepared now We have generations of people that do no longer use analog clocks and they use digital, so that doesn't mean something for many of our students. So in this particular slide, because we're looking at this person from the bottom, you want to talk about reading something appropriately from the bottom to the top. The other one is being accurate. Make sure the information you give is true, correct, and faithful to the narrative. For example, this image is in a subway station. Now, I can say that it's busy, or I can say that it's crowded, but unless I know that for sure, that is speculation because I cannot see that from the image, okay? So again, you want to be careful about that. And then the last one is be brief. Shorter is better, so try to avoid redundancies and repetitions. Okay, I just wanted to set this up. The Canadian National Institute for the Blind has a fairly new center in London. And they recently, as part of the Doors Open Ontario in London, they've created a virtual tour of their facility. And so what this is, we've just taken a small little bit. I only want you to go up to 44. But this is the first part. They're describing their logo and they're describing the front of the building. And so it's a useful way to see how the CNIB describes their own areas. Okay, Sherry.
Opening slide, a bright yellow wallpaper with the CNIB logo in the center.
The next slide is the exterior front building view of the CNIB London Community Hub on Richmond Street. The CNIB sign is above windows and doors. The CNIB logo is on yellow background to the left of the sign. On the right, the background is white. It has a black drawn dog with a yellow harness and the words CNIB Guide Dogs. The floor-to-ceiling windows have decals on them of the Sun for Our Live programs, Briefcase for Work, Shoe for Play, Book for Learn programs. The letter I decal is for CNIB. There is a ramp with a metal rail.
Okay, so they're very specific. They went from top to bottom, so there's a directional component, and then they give you an idea specifically about what you see on the different screens, okay? So CNIB has lots of information about how to use descriptors to help people, and it's a useful location to go. Okay, Sherry, can we go to the next slide? So one other thing is on this slide is which elements are needed to understand the content. Okay, so what is central to the point of this particular image? Now, you don't know, I do, that this is an image of Emerald Lake, which is part of the Canadian Rocky Mountains. It's located in Alberta and the Yoho National Park, okay? Now, you have to decide whether that information is necessary or whether we're talking about something else. So background information sometimes may be needed, and so you might have to include that in the descriptor, okay? So what do you essentially highlight here, okay? So we're looking at two mountains within a mountain range, okay? So that's one of the things. There's a lake with people canoeing on it. Do we need to indicate that there's only one canoeist, or do we just say that we have canoeist on it? We indicate that it is forested at the bottom of the mountain because we certainly have a forest area. There is a clearing at the base. Is this clearing essential? Well, in the case of Emerald Lake, and the fact that it's in Yoho National Park, it is important to include that because this is an area which is part of the Emerald Lake Trail. People walk along it. It's also an area where people ski. So that opening might be something that you have to include. It's a sunlit day. Do we need to include what season it is? It's not the winter time. The weather isn't calm because we can see that on the ripples. So you need to actually go through the image and look at what is essential to convey the essence and what the sequence it is. The other thing is there's stuff in here that's irrelevant, okay? Do we have to say anything about the canoeists are wearing a life jackets and hats? Nah, I don't think so. Do we have to say what color the water is? Do we have to say that the trees are reflecting in the lake? And do we have to say anything about the snow being up on the mountains? These are not things that are essential to convey the idea. Okay, Sherry? Okay, here's another slide, and it has two pictures. They're both of Detroit. So what details are required in order to understand these two images? Okay, so the first thing you need to think about is the subject. The subject of this is the skyline of a major metropolitan area. Okay, so that we're talking about that. Okay, so the subject is, it's a skyline and it's of an urban center, a metropolitan area. The second thing is location and setting. Well, we have to locate this. This is the city of Detroit, which is in the United States. But the view is from the Windsor side, which is in Canada. Okay, so we're setting up an opposition here. Okay, now this automatically leads into the next item. Directional orientation. You have to, in many instances, and you may need to, sometimes it's not essential, give cardinal points, north, south, east, and west, okay? So in this instance, the perspective is towards the north and from the west end of the city of Windsor. That puts this in context of how we're looking at this, okay? The other thing is you may need to know something about the foreground and background, the positioning. The top image is from the west side of the Ambassador Bridge. And you can comment that the bridge has trucks moving over it, but it's far down the riverway, okay? The lower image is from along the walkway of the riverfront, which is near Ambassador Park. So it's on the Canadian side and it's on. Do I need to say that it's in the sculpture garden? I don't think so. It's not necessary. I don't see any sculptures. That's too much information, so I don't need to put that in there. And the last one is the idea of features. What features do you do? Because this is a skyline, do I need to talk about the objects? And the objects in this particular instance would be the Renaissance Center being a tall building, the Penobscot building, the Cobo Hall. You might want to locate what these are, okay? So there's lots to include, and you have to be generally very selective. Okay, Sherry. The other one is you have to be concise, okay? So as I would write this, this is how I would write this. And I'm not saying it's the best, but this is what I might put as a descriptor for this. I would say, the orbiting paths of the 8 planets in our solar system around the sun, moving from left, closest to the sun, Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. That's all I have to say, right? That's all the basic picture is. Now, more is not necessarily better. We have a tendency to put more stuff in there. It's not necessary to do this. This is basically about the planets. We don't need to know that NASA just had its new rover, the Perseverance landed in February of this year. Okay, that's not necessary. Too much information, not needed. So the other thing is, don't introduce terms or unnecessarily concepts. I don't need to know that Mercury is the smallest planet in our solar system. That's not part of what this description is. I don't have to say that it's slightly bigger than the Earth's moon. I don't have to say that it rotates around the Earth, 80 times in 88 days. None of that is important, okay? That's superfluous. So don't introduce things that you want. Now, is the color useful in this? Well, the color in this is useful only to separate the objects. It has nothing to do with the interpretation. So in this particular instance, color would not be necessary, okay? All right, Sherry. Okay, now I want to hear from you guys, all right? So when we're looking, and many of us use graphs, we use tables, we use illustrations in our classes. So let's try to summarize what I just said in terms of this particular image that we see here. What does this image convey, and how do you know it conveys that? Anybody want to answer that?
Conveys election results, and we know because it's labeled as such at the top.
Correct. Okay. So the information of this, it says it's Canadian 2021, so we know that. We know it's election results. It's interesting that they've listed a liberal minority government, okay? We don't know if that's true, but we don't know if that's a statement in that, by the way they said that was necessary, okay? All right. What is most essential and central to this particular image? So what is the most important point that is being made by this image? And how is that being made?
Hazard a guess. I think maybe the important point that's being made is that the Liberal Party won, and that point is being made through a comparison of how many seats they won versus seats won by the other parties.
Correct. Great. So we know that the Liberals have won it. We know that it's a minority government. And there are certain details in this particular image that give us that, okay? So here's some directionality. We talked about direction when we talked about the bridge and some of the other ones, that all the parties are represented in this particular instance. It's organized from a top to bottom, and it's organized from a left to right, going from the highest concentration of seats to the lowest concentrations of seats, okay? So that description of the fact that it's going in sequential order from highest to lowest, as one would read those out, 158 seats for the Liberals, and they've gained 1 seat, that might be most important. The colors in this particular instance are not necessarily the best colors, but they're colors associated with the particular government that comes into office. The Liberals being red, the Conservatives being blue, the Parti Québécois, and then orange for the NDP. And again, they've used something here which is really quite bad, I find, is that they've used plus or minus in terms of the votes, but the contrast of these numbers is very, very poor. So no, it's very difficult for someone to see that, so someone would have to be articulated, right? Now, what information is irrelevant? Is there any information on this particular image that is irrelevant? We don't really have... Go, Peter.
It depends on the point of the image, right? So if the point of the image is just to show which party won and compare the number of seats the party won to the parties that didn't, then perhaps it's irrelevant knowing how many seats they lost or gained in comparison to what they held previously. But if that's also part of the point, then perhaps not.
Right, exactly. So it depends on the intent and how you're using the image. So sometimes you can have an image where you selectively choose what you put in and what you don't put in based on what you're trying to convey, right? The other thing is I don't have to comment on the fact that we have a Canadian flag up there. That's not necessary, and that it represents all the colors. Okay. So don't be afraid in the fact that sometimes you have to pick and choose what you include. But this is, I won't say time consuming, but it is. Like, you have to seriously look at each image and make sure the information that's needed to convey what you're doing in the classroom is told in the description. Sherry? Okay, and then this last one, and Sherry made reference to this. Not all faculty are using exclusively media within their classroom. Many faculty now have decided to use alternative ways or include ways to communicate with students. They're using Twitter, they've got Facebook accounts, they're on Instagrams, LinkedIn Learn. There are all sorts of things that they're including. So the other thing is, it's not just your PowerPoints that you're using in class, but the other modes of communication with your students, you should seriously consider using an alt text so that all students, again, can have access to this no matter what platform they're using, especially if they're on social posts. Okay.
And I'll just add to that, if you can't add alt text, because that may not be an option due to the platform, you'll see that sometimes on like Facebook, where you'll see, the point or the announcement, and then there's image description, and they describe the image that's being shown, so everybody has the same information. Okay. And I think next we have, we'll go to questions, but we just want to point out we do have some resource pages with some tips of where to go for some more information if you want to get more details, or the how-tos, the step-by-step on things that we shared today, and the links to some of the videos that we've shown. All right, so I guess we have 8 minutes left, and if there's any questions or comments, we can take them now. Yeah, Erica. We'll take Erica first, and then we'll go to you, Michael.
Hey, I was just going to ask, when we're teaching, we're often now, especially since we're online, using interactive technologies to try to engage students, which is really good, but also can have the impact of excluding students. Are you hearing any trends of issues we should be thinking about in some of the interactive, engaging materials when we're trying to create interactions in the online environment?
One of the things, I know some faculty and some of the students groups were using different platforms because they liked how you can interact, but they didn't all have closed captioning. So I know for Welcome Week, for example, I looked at some of the platforms that were being suggested, and without closed captioning, you're automatically excluding students. So that's been a nice thing, that there is some of that's helpful, that it's you can do the live captioning. It's not 100% accurate, but it is helpful, and it's come a long way, or particularly over the last 18 months. Okay, Michael?
Hi. Yeah, that's a good question, Erica, too. I was wondering about that. Now, what kinds of supports are there for faculty who want to do these kinds of things, but maybe struggling trying to figure out how to do it if they're teaching a full course load, for instance, with all of their courses, in terms of time. And my interest in this comes from an even more particular point, which is that as a visually impaired person, a lot of the things necessary to make my materials accessible are not necessarily accessible to me, or are accessible only with great difficulty, so that the amount of time required to make the materials accessible is so great that it sort of eats away at anything else I might do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't have answers for that, although somebody did reach out to me so that we could do some of this kind of work with GAs and TAs. So I'm hoping maybe ongoing training with GAs and TAs, and maybe you can get some support that way. I don't have much more of an answer, but that is something that I will write down, and that's a good thing to consider and see what we can work out moving forward. But that's an excellent point. I don't know if anybody else on the call has some ideas.
Michael, if I could sort of piggyback on that too, the other thing is a lot of faculty, using the comparison about building construction and coming in after the fact and putting ramps in after the building, is lots of people don't think about the integration of it when they do their courses and they start the courses. Like, for example, we have a whole group of early career faculty. All of them should be thinking about, in early career faculty, each of their courses have to do this. You can't do them at one time, and it's very labor intensive, as you just indicated. So one of the thing is we need support. There's no question.
Yeah, and I think there's, like, with many of the things that we try to help faculty learn and integrate into their teaching, there's a lot of goodwill. I think there's a lot of people who want to do these things and who want to be helpful and who want to be more inclusive and accessible. It's just there are only so many hours in a day, and they're worried about how on earth to make it happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think also the other thing too, Michael, hopefully we'll be able to integrate some of the new software that we're looking at, the Panorama, that will allow students to convert documents on demand into more accessible formats. So that's in the works too, which will be helpful. But some of the things, like going back and changing all curriculum and making sure, that certainly is time intensive. But knowing, again, like Erica or Veronica said, doing it up front. But even the simple things like better descriptions, we're all using PowerPoint, we're doing things online, and we're using more visuals, just even things like that, just being able to stop and not assume that everybody can read what's on the screen, and make sure that you're reading. Or, oftentimes you hear, okay, I'm not going to tell you what's on the screen, you guys can read it for yourself, and I'm just going to talk. Well, stopping those kind of assumptions, backing up, reading what's on the screen, describing the image. So those are some of the things that you can just actually do while you're teaching. So if we can start.
I think you're right. Yeah, I think you're right. I think there are some smaller good faith sorts of practices that we can engage in that just address those assumptions that don't need to be made. I think you're right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And if I can say this, and Sherry won't do this, but I'm going to do this for Sherry. For a long period of time, we've talked about accessibility, and we certainly have recognized it, but the movement towards having things within our institution have been accelerated through the recent hiring of Sherry. And I think now, if more of us make this something that is really important, that we articulate this more often, and that there are funds available to this, then we can get support and resources to it, which is what is needed.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to see, well, maybe I shouldn't say it here, but I'd like to see some more, resources available for PDF remediation, and that's a specialty skill. And I know some people at other universities are trained on PDF remediation. So making sure that the PDFs have the proper tags, and as a PowerPoint, the screen reader goes through the document. Sometimes it doesn't know what box to read first, and so those are all those things that are resolved through PDF remediation. And I don't think we have any specialty on campus with that, but I'm trying to figure out how we could, but I don't have that figured out yet.
We can all get together and apply for a grant.
Yes. Yes. Well, thanks everyone. I see it's 11:30. I think the PowerPoint presentation will be shared with you, and you'll be able to access resources, and there's links within the document. And then Erica has shared our website on ARIA, which has a lot of links and useful tools on creating accessible content. Oh, yeah, and there's the link for the community hub that Veronica shared. So thanks, everyone. If there's no other questions, you can email me, reach out if you would like, or Veronica, and we're happy to address your questions.
Beautiful work. Thank you very much, Sherry and Veronica.
No, our pleasure.
Yeah, our pleasure. Have a great long weekend, everyone.
Yeah. Take care, you guys.